Hello, everyone, and welcome to another webinar here with us. I think this is number 5. So, welcome back. I am spotting a few returners, so welcome back, and a few new faces. Thank you. We're going to let everyone filter in just for a few seconds here. But what we're really excited to do is talk in a little bit more detail about a webinar that we actually had 2 times ago with our guest from Spotify when Sevi joined us, and we want to talk more about how to build platforms between Backstage and Terraform with that invisible glue. So I think Daniel's going to kick us off here today.
Thanks, Abby. Great stuff. I'll do proper intros in just a moment. We'll intro ourselves, but let's power through onto the future of platforms. What I'm going to say is, as Abby's mentioned in previous webinars, we've hopefully been super clear. So you need to be clear on your goal for building your platform, because as this meme I've got here, like shows, you aren't doing it wrong if no one knows what you're doing, right? So if you're just building random stuff, people are going to be like, well, it looks okay, but you've got to focus on why you're going to build a platform, and we're going to look into that more in a moment. But as a high level key takeaways for today, Abby and I have seen 3 ways, broadly speaking, that folks are building platforms, and we've built our fair share of folks as well, of platforms with folks. The first one is this top-down application developer-focused approach to building platforms. Backstage service catalog, we're picking on Backstage, but any portal, right? We're seeing lots of amazing portals out there. The catalog is fantastic, gets you started on day one, but things like upgrades and maintenance and policy change can be a little bit more tricky. The second approach we've seen is this bottom-up operations infrastructure focused way of building platforms. And this is kind of my background. Although I was a Java dev, when I moved into ops, I really got involved with Terraform, with Crossplane, all that good stuff, right? And I love that, but I appreciate not every developer does. The workflow with Terraform, the TF apply and TF plan, amazing, right? But the infrastructure abstractions, the stanzas in Terraform, the CRDs in Crossplane, they can leak through to developers, increasing cognitive load, making it hard to understand what's going on. The third way we're seeing now pop up is this middle out, and it'll make more sense when we come onto the sort of 3 layers later on, but this middle out platform engineering focused way of building things. Abby and I are fully dialed into this. Everything as a service, right? Abby, we love that. Not just like hyperscaler, database as a service, but your internal services on your platform. Maybe you've got a specialized cache or a fraud detection service if you're a bank. That's your service, right? And you want to offer it as a service. You want to automate your processes, your automation, and manage it at scale. And as it says here, this platform as a product approach is so critical. And Abby will go into a bit more detail on that later. But that's the high level TLDRs, that slide there. Quick introduction. Abby, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. I'm Abby Bangser. As it says here, I'm an engineer at Syntasso. My background is been actually since the day I got into engineering, helping organizations and my teams move faster and more safely with all sorts of titles from QA, DevOps, platform engineer, SRE. And what's really exciting about my role at Syntasso is what we're trying to codify that to make it that much more widely accessible to people. And I think that's really fun and exciting. And so you'll also see me around. I'm a CNCF working group lead and a team topology advocate, and around in different communities, just trying to soak in the learning.
Fantastic. I think like me and you, it's like job titles are like Pokemon. We've got to collect them all, right? Because I've done a similar vibe. I've done like dev, I've done QA, I've done ops, I've done CTO cut gigs. Now working with the awesome folks at Syntasso. And like Abby said, we're focused on helping platform engineers thrive. And that's through technology. We've got Cratix, but that's also through process and people as well. Because we've definitely realized in our careers, like it's a socio-technical challenge. And we're here to like you, Abby, I'm here to learn from folks. I'm here to share what we've got. So super looking forward today to diving in a little bit deeper on the Backstage and Terraform, the missing middle, the invisible glue we like to talk about. Let's go on to the next slide, Abby. Yes, so we've got the what of platforms. So if we dive a bit deeper into the what, we do like what the Gartner folks are talking about. We regularly chat to the Gartner people, like at conferences, we see them online. And I think actually this article I've quoted here has recently changed. But when I looked at it a month ago, this was a diagram I saw. And I really like this diagram of platform engineering. If you sort of look at it, you can see almost 3 levels in there, which I kind of like already, right? And we'll talk about that more later. But if we go on to the next slide, Abby, I'm really keen to like dive into what platform engineering offers. And it's something that we all at Syntasso firmly believe in, improving developer experience. As Abby mentioned, Sevi and Abby dived into that a lot in the previous webinar. Really interesting stuff. But improving that developer experience with self-service capabilities and automating the infrastructure operations. There's a bunch of stuff wrapped up in there, depending on where you're coming from. But there's this notion of AIs, right? API, AI on the brain, apologies. There's a notion of APIs, like so getting the domains correct, how you pull in, into the actual platform and get your services out. There's this notion of automation. You want to automate your workflows, your processes relevant to your business, and you want to have the abstractions correct. Abby and I are increasingly bouncing this idea of getting abstractions correct around. Like you don't want to offer raw compute primitives, you want to offer the service level primitives, right? So this Gartner page here is a real nice jumping off point, something you can send to your boss, something you can enjoy as well, but it really sets the level of what to expect when you're building a platform, when you're running or standing up a platform engineering team. So with expectations, this is the Gartner hype cycle, I believe, on the next screen, and you can see platform engineering is a sort of cresting the top here, yeah, of the was it the peak of inflated expectations, heading down into the trough of disillusionment. I think I've actually got a graphic. Yeah, that's kind of how I see many of us, right? Going, whether you sort of how much you dial into the Gartner models, I do find them very useful. Of that some things just get overhyped, and you have to go through this wave of people making mistakes. Again, Abby and I have lived that, right? We certainly made our fair share of mistakes, fair share of successes with technology. You have to go through these failures before you then go to the other side, so this slope of enlightenment, the plateau of productivity, where we all sort of make big gains, and we particularly see the later adopters coming on board and really getting hold of the technology. But it's going to be a little bit of a rough ride. And as the next slide shows, Abby and I actually went through, and we've just used Reddit, but like if you go LinkedIn, go on the blogs, you'll see it everywhere. We've picked out sort of 3 stories, and we'll dive into 2 more later, but of folks that are sort of, why they built a platform and some of the challenges they encountered. And there'll be no surprises with the title of the webinar. It was kind of this missing middle that kind of let them down. So if we go on to the next slide, we'll see we're now talking about the why of platforms. And I think it was if we go on to the next slide, the next, I think it was the first Reddit thread this comes from. I put the link down there, so we'll share the slide deck later and you can follow up anyway. But this one company was like, we want to improve onboarding like Spotify was doing. So Backstage, logical choice, improving developer onboarding, encoding those best practices, right? Those sort of automations, those workflows for your particular org. Backstage is perfect for that. But they also flagged that if you're building on Kubernetes, it's not raw compute, but it's not quite platform abstraction. They said, just be aware, if you are embracing Kubernetes and you're putting Backstage on top and other things, you're kind of building a custom platform as a service. And that comes, great power, great responsibility, right? So something to think about there. That's the why, but there's some challenges. And if we look at another example, this, I'm sure Abby and I can almost relate to this. We get the shivers when we read this, right? Operations were drowning. Like, yeah, I've been there. Too much time on the Jira tickets, on the ServiceNow tickets, on the Slack tickets, whatever you use. A reaction sometimes is to push back and go, we'll just train the folks to self-serve by training developers to use Terraform, to use Helm. I actually quite enjoyed that journey, but I appreciate many companies I was consulting to 5-10 years ago the developers did not want to learn Terraform. They ended up sort of pushing the burden onto other senior folks like myself, and you do create this kind of shadow operations problem where like ops have kind of like shunted the burden across, but they're not looking after the day 2 rollout. If you want to upgrade your security policy, do app rollouts. Well, if you've been handed a bunch of Terraform as a developer, like it's like being given a puppy for Christmas, right? It's great on day 1, but then you got to look after this puppy. It's amazing, but you got to look after it, right? You got to feed it, you got to look after it. Same deal with Terraform and Helm. I remember giving developers this stuff and they were like, what do I do with it, right? So something definitely to be aware of if you are building out this platform. Before I hand over to Abby, I just want to get everyone thinking, what are the goals of your platform? And this is really important. Now, we broadly see 3 goals. The first of them, is going faster. So you need to offer everything as a service in your organization. That sort of API, that domain boundary is really key, getting it everything as a service to like sustainably deliver that value to end users. Decreasing risk, safety, really, really important, right? You want to automate the processes, the approvals, the sign off, the all the compliance things. You want to include that in the platform like as much as possible rather than having to do like snowflake compliance on all your different services. And finally, you want to do all this at scale. Once you've got this, everything as a service, automated your processes, you want to be able to manage this, as a fleet, right? Manage it at scale. And if you actually look on the, I've got my next transition, Abby, is the team topologies book. Abby's actually an advocate, and I'm a huge fan. I'm lucky enough to know Matthew and Manuel, consider them friends. I followed this journey they've been on. The 3 things here, like I've kind of borrowed them, stolen them, right, from the team topologies parlance. And Abby and I were actually at FastFlow Conf last week or a couple of weeks ago, and these 3 things were continually mentioned. So bear them in mind as Abby goes into now more of the sort of nuts and bolts of platform building. Bear these things in mind as you're building your platform.
Yeah, so thank you, Daniel. I'm going to jump into, as you say, the nuts and bolts about how we're seeing people actually build these platforms and actually my own experiences building both from that top down developer experience focus as well as that bottom up operations, because I have been in both of those camps. So the first way of building that Daniel laid out was that top-down or app developer focused mindset, and the idea of saying that a some sort of a user interface is your platform. So Backstage is your platform, or Jira or a ticketing system is that in that way, and that's one kind of trigger that you might think about if you want to know if this is sort of the direction that you may be finding yourself. The other big thing that you may find yourself thinking about is what is actually possible through that platform. Is it mostly focused on those like creation stories? So new services, deploying new things with pretty light focus on the day two or the operational side of things. Sure, you can view some metrics, but maybe you don't have access to do things like upgrades and updates through that same interface. Or maybe you do have access to some of those things, but everything has to be done one at a time. So, what happens when a huge security risk comes out and you need to patch everything at once? So, how do you kind of manage those? But this is an extremely attractive way of building platforms. And as I say, I've been there because it gives that developer experience right off the bat. That service catalog, that where are you, what's going on in your organization brings a lot of value immediately. And that's fantastic. It's also highly customizable. Now, this is a little bit based on which portal you choose, but Backstage being the one that we're mentioning here and one that we're seeing, huge adoption of, it's a framework in its own right. You can change not just the colors and the fonts, but you can change everything about people's interactions, what people see on their pages, how the plugins interact with each other, and so on. So there's a lot that you can do here for the kind of way and users will interact with this platform and this portal. However, the things that we mentioned that are a bit harder are those sort of next steps. So, first of all, when building out this portal, you need a way to be able to actually execute those automations or those processes in your organization, that Terraform, that Ansible, all that other infrastructure is code. And often this becomes a one to one relationship between the portal and that script or that workflow or that code. So you need to change both in lockstep, yet they live in very different parts of the organization. That's made even harder when you think about the fact that you may want more than one interface in the future. So while a portal might fit even 80-90% of your use cases, maybe, there's going to be automation use cases, CI/CD. There's going to be people who want to work from the CLI in their terminals. There's going to be different interfaces you're going to need. How are you going to then replicate that? Are you going to make another one-to-one relationship between your infrastructure as code and that interface, or are you going to have something that manages that? And then finally, those day two aspects, this is where we've just been building plugins for Backstage. We're actually building that edit ability of something that has been created by the template is definitely viable and doable through the plugin ecosystem, but it's not by default. By default, it is sort of this fire and forget mentality. You create your template, it goes and creates something. But what happens when you need to update it? And that's where I'm going to share my story and my learning from a past building of a platform. And so I was in an organization that had this concept of a service builder when I joined the organization. And I'm going to tell a bit of the history of this because it gave us a huge amount of value, but struggled on that management side of things. So we created this service builder because in 2016, the organization was mostly a monolith and it was running on VMs in AWS, so EC2 instances. And there was a desire to break down this monolith because we were seeing that there was scaling issues. So certain parts of the monolith needed more scale than others, as well as scaling of the team. So getting enough people to be able to make changes in the code base at the same time, and we're starting to slow down. Introduce Service Builder. This was a CLI tool that people could use to create a bootstrapped application that gave you an entire walking skeleton through to production. You got your repository, you got your CI/CD, you got your metrics and your logs, and you got your code base in whatever language you chose. And the interface was very simple. Tell me your language, tell me your team, tell me your service name. And that was great. And we got a little bit of traction. Couple years later, though, we realized that we need to be able to orchestrate this now number of services, and we decided to move on to Kubernetes. Moving to Kubernetes was the right decision for the organization, but did mean we had to change how we did deployments. It was no longer to virtual machines. We now had tens of repos. I think the number was about 12 that we needed to manage. And this is a really small number for many of the people listening today, I'm sure. So take this and try and multiply it as well. But of those 12, some percentage hadn't touched the code base's deployment mechanisms since they bootstrapped. Fine, super easy. We can automate that easily. Some had only minorly changed the file and the structure, but they hadn't actually changed the mechanism. So again, fine, we could figure out a way to automate that pretty easily and update it. But some had completely taken ownership of this, and we really had to work with them to move their deployment mechanisms to Kubernetes. 12 repos, all good. Fast forward a couple years. It's never the last migration. There's always another one. And this time we wanted to move off of a self run Kubernetes to the cloud managed Kubernetes. And in doing so, wanted to also take advantage of the now mature GitOps workflows. So we wanted to move into Argo as a deploy mechanism to add some resilience to that deployment rather than a push mechanism. Well, we'd continued to have success. Again, these are relatively small numbers, but having 60, 70 different repositories, all in those different states we were talking about, made it extremely difficult. And it took us almost 3 or 4 months to move everybody over to this new way of deploying. And that shouldn't really have been that because it wasn't something that brought business value that allocated 3 to 4 months worth of time and energy of our team. So we had a great builder, but we struggled on that management side of things. I haven't only done that though. I've also made other mistakes or other learnings. And this time I want to talk a bit about the second way we're seeing people build out platforms over the last few years and of recent times. That's that bottom up. You may find yourself saying things like this if this is how you are building your platform. Terraform is my platform. Ansible is my platform. Some technology that is a clear implementation, that is my platform. And you may have a lot of pride and a lot of benefit from just how automated this is. So, in particular, that reducing of toil on the infrastructure engineers, platform engineers, ops engineers, that is something that you get here because you're using cron jobs, HCL, GitOps, and other mechanisms to improve it. So everything is code in this world. Everything is really automated where it can be. Even manual tasks are ways that people can do that through Slack and through different tools in a more kind of mechanical way. However, the infrastructure abstraction is leaking. What we're seeing is that developers have to actually learn all the same tools as operations engineers, just at a little bit less degree, just how to use it, not how to create it. And we're also seeing that at scale, the diversity of tools needed makes this very difficult to create a unified experience. So when you need a config management tool like Ansible, along with an infrastructure as code tool like Terraform, along with scripting tools that might use Golang and Python and Bash, how are you pulling that all together into a unified platform is quite difficult. So my experience with this was using Terraform for self-serve, specifically an HCL set of modules where people could come and collect anything they needed on demand and self-service. But that idealism was a little bit optimistic. Specifically, Terraform is like any other code language. It takes linting, it takes consistency to make that code base something that you can maintain and iterate on and refactor. And the reality was is that the conventions of Terraform weren't commonplace to our engineers, our software engineers. So it meant that nearly every request they made took a little bit of back and forth between the platform team suggesting little niggles and needing those updated. So it was a PR review meant that this was no longer self-service. They were dependent on us. In addition, we had these business requirements that were out of band. We were PCI compliant, we had manual processes as well as reporting and other things. And those were all done in CI CD pipelines or scripts or other repositories. And again, that lockstep changing between our what we thought was self-service Terraform and what actually became business relevant technology got us into a bit of trouble. So the final thing was that in transitioning from Terraform to our next migration, in this case to the controllers in Kubernetes, our engineers who had learned Terraform were frustrated because they had just learned the previous language and now they have to learn the new one, the YAML and the Kubernetes. And the ones who hadn't learned were a bit vindicated of like, well, I'm not learning this new one because you just made me change from, you were just been telling me I need to know this old language. So that leaking of what it was to implement this stuff meant that our ability to transition implementations was limited. And when you think about that from a kind of web app perspective, you would never ask a user to change how they call your API just because you changed the language of your web service. So that's sort of where we got ourselves a bit caught. But Daniel is going to dive into that third option, which we're seeing evolve and introduce now, which is the missing middle.
Yeah, thanks, Abby. And the things you mentioned there were like all too familiar to me, right? In terms of like I've made those similar mistakes and similar successes too. So yeah, let's look around the world here. Abby and I always like to look at what's going on, standing on the shoulders of giants, right? We like to look around the community, look around the industry. Comes like definitely from speaking for myself, my academic days, I was always taught to do a literature review, right? And there's a bunch of smart folks, Crossplane, the Upbound folks. Like if you look at what they're doing, if you go to the next transition, Abby, we can dive into a composite resource. It seems to be like the claims at the top, as Abby sort of mentioned, like, you know, what developers, what ops folks want. And then you've got the infrastructure below. There's this composite resource that is composing the various things, orchestrating arguably the various things together in the middle here. If we go to the next, it's the Canoe folks. I think Abby actually switched me on to the Canoe folks. Super interesting work going on. Well worth having a little Google around on what they're doing, or maybe an AWS search around, because there are a lot of AWS folks involved in that rather than Google. But they again have this missing middle, right? They talk about infrastructure as code, continuous delivery, workflow orchestration. That bridge, if you look at the way they've orchestrated it there, that bridge between applications and operations. Always interesting when you see more folks coming to the same conclusions. And if you go to platformengineering.org, Humanitech folks heavily involved in this one, you can see they've got in the middle here the platform orchestrator framework. They actually named Kratix, which is our open source platform orchestrator. There's the Humanitech one there, Fusion Stack, and a few other ones that have popped into that space. But they're saying that's like the brains of the platform, the intelligent glue, the invisible glue, the missing middle. They're also coming to similar conclusions as us. And of course, I've got to mention Kratix, right? It's on the t-shirt, so to speak, Abby, right? We got to say Kratix. With the whole company, that the founders, Colin, Chris, Paula, have really they've lived from Cloud Foundry days and other days, and they've baked this whole notion of platform orchestration, this missing middle, into Kratix, the framework. So check out Kratix, go to kratix.io. You can see all the things Abby and I are talking today about sort of gluing that portal, Backstage, gluing that infrastructure, that Terraform in our case today, gluing that together by thinking about APIs, abstractions, and automation, and building a platform that's relevant to your organization. That's the key here. If we go on to the next slide, bit of an eye chart. This one I'll skip through it quite quick because you can check out the blog post linked there. Again, Abby and I will share the slides later on. But this is the way that sort of internally in Syntasso, and I think we've been looking at a few other places, the way kind of we're thinking about the model of the world. And I had a fantastic chat with Keith Morris recently, and he's got an awesome book on O'Reilly, Infrastructure as Code. New versions coming out soon, and he was kind of looking at the world in the same way. And I was like, cool, if Keith's thinking that, this is interesting, right? Because Keith's super smart. So we're talking about application choreography, this sort of UI, this CLI, this portal. Developers are focusing on coding, shipping, and running at that level. Very familiar with that layer. If we go to the next one, yeah, infrastructure composition, infrastructure orchestration. That's that plan, build, maintain. That's a plan, apply, maintain. Platform engineers, DevOps folks, operators, sysadmins, you're focused on building out the kind of VMs, the storage, the networking, the raw infrastructure to provide these high level platform services, which we look in the middle. This is the platform orchestration layer. I think one more transition, Abby. I think it then goes purple. Yeah, nice. I got to get my purple. I know it's rocking the same as your hoodie color, right? Got to get the purple in there. This is where I think the ideas and the domain and the APIs are crystallizing with the likes of Kratix and Fusion Stack and other places. This is focused on this operating things as a service, baking your organization's workflow, your governance, your policy, your compliance into that, and being able to manage it at scale, as Abby kind of talked about in her experience. I've seen this too. We've got things rocking, but we just couldn't scale it. And like Kratix in particular, we baked that in day one as well. This is all about the platform API, the platform lifecycle. So this is kind of this missing middle, this intelligent glue, this invisible glue. We're calling it many different names at the moment, but I think many of us in the industry are coming to the conclusion that this is really important to understand, to think about separation of concerns and single responsibility principle, or good architecture principles between the three layers. Making it happen, I think this one's on to you, Abby, is that now the rubber hits the road, right?
It is. I feel like these webinars are really great to set the tone high level. It's important to see how these trends are over the industry, and it's great that you're tracking all this, Daniel, and helping us kind of pull these things all together. But it's very frustrating to attend webinars like this and go, but then what's next? And I think it's interesting to look at what are people who are actually in the platform engineering space today uh, expecting, wanting, and what tools are kind of coming out to support them. So, the first thing I want to call out is that platform engineers today are needing to step above that infrastructure as code level. One of the reasons why we find people coming from the bottom up is because that's where the tools are. The tools are in that infrastructure as code spot. But what we're finding is that more and more tools are trying to become more interoperable, become more kind of core to working together to be able to allow people to think in bigger blocks. And we're getting these tech stacks. There's some examples here is the backstack where it's these four projects that are all working together to try and build a way to have a portal that has secure infrastructure requirements and requests. The canoe framework, it was mentioned, has this IDP builder which allows for AWS and its large customers to talk through what products they most depend on. We have Cube First, which is an open source project now under the Civo family that has the fully GitOps mentality of Terraform, but including Terraform and Crossplane and other things. And then there's, of course, the CNCF landscape, which it might not feel like that's a tech stack, but in some ways it really is because it all works on that CNCF Kubernetes ecosystem. And there are more, right? These are just the ones that are really popping to the surface. But just because there are tech stacks doesn't mean it's an easy job for us as platform engineers. We still have decisions to make. Specifically within these stacks, we have to make decisions about how opinionated we're happy to buy into our system and how much we want to own all of the individual decisions. All of these are open source solutions, but if you're picking the backstack, you're picking those four projects. If you're picking CNCF ecosystem, you're picking hundreds and hundreds of possible projects. So where are you and how opinionated do you want to be? The second thing that we're seeing with platform engineers today is a requirement for extensibility and usability, which is creating a demand for APIs. More specifically, what we're feeling, and this is nothing new, is that business requirements change. They have always and they always will. That user expectations change and evolve. They always have and they always will. And what APIs do is they allow for that sustainable building of platforms where you can create composable and decomposable solutions that allow you to really evolve in a maintainable way. And so there's a lot of tools out there making APIs and APIs in the sense of contracts that separate consumer from producer. OAM, Score, these are solutions that create a contract between an app developer and how you provide them with the infrastructure that they need. You've got Cradix with our promises. That in itself is an API and a contract for something as a service on demand. Got Cube Builder that creates those CRDs in Kubernetes and allows you to create web services essentially inside the Kubernetes runtime. Crossplane creates those compositions. Massdriver has the ability to create packages. All of these and more are trying to create a separation between consumers and producers. And again, there's decisions we have to make. How much do we want our decisions to be really implementation focused? So that Massdriver, Crossplane, this is really focused on the APIs behind the scenes being accessible and made visible, or how much more user focused? So OAM and Score are quite limited to a specific app dev experience, but it makes for a very opinionated and focused experience for them. So, again, what you need is going to help you choose which or maybe more than one of these that is the right solution for different parts of your platform stack. But by getting more concrete, which is part of what I want to do, I'm also getting more into the tech, and we end up in this situation. I just told you to look at the CNCF landscape to be able to build a more high level abstraction. That seems a bit crazy in some ways. It's a bit overwhelming. So, just want to reiterate back that part of this, or like the big pieces, is not just tech. Because if you build with just tech and you assume they will come, you're going to be in for a world of pain. What you really need to do is think about what you're building from first principles of what value you're providing. Think about the problems you want to solve, then they will actually come because you will be solving problems for them. So don't forget that product focus. We've got that call out from ThoughtWorks around things like the rise of the portal for the user experience, the focus on your users, and that doesn't mean just app devs. There's other types of platform users. And when you're doing all of this, just a bit of a shout back to Daniel here, is that the team topologies book he mentioned talks about how to identify those users, how to work with them, how to make that bigger picture there. So yeah, keep that in mind as you're going. And Daniel, I'm sorry I left you literally negative minutes to wrap up, but
I'm always doing this to you, Abby. It's only fair you do it to me, right? So thank you so much, Abby. And it's perfect. I really like your explanations there. We'll just do the final conclusion slide. And again, folks, you can download the slide deck later on. So I won't labor the points too much. We just rattle down through them, Abby. We definitely want to build your platform intentionally. Hopefully that's come through both of our experiences. APIs, abstraction, automation are the key. I really like the way Abby phrased that in the previous section. That middle out platform engineering focus is the way we believe that it should be done. And watch out for this missing middle. You need that intelligent glue, that invisible glue, that platform orchestration layer, I think is really powerful. Watch out for warning signs. We've mentioned it several times. There's two sort of main warning signs. The first one is struggling with scaling your day two ops, upgrades, policy change, security rollouts. If you're struggling with that with your portal, could be a sign of the missing glue there, the missing middle. And if infrastructure abstractions are leaking up towards your devs and they're getting a bit overloaded, or you get in the shadow IT, that's a warning sign. You might be missing that middle as well. You need that glue to bring everything together. And finally, just to double down, platform as a product. Abby and I are strong proponents of this, but it really, when you start thinking about your thing you're building, you're solving customer pain points, that's when the magic happens, right? And Abby said, there's many customers internally for your platform. Recognize them, identify them, chat with them, make them your friends. You will build a better platform because of that. And I think, Abby, that's perfect timing. We're like 1 minute over. That's pretty good for us. I think the amount of information we've dropped today, I'm pretty happy with that. There is a QR code if folks want to download and find out more information from the Syntastic website. You've probably got an offer popping up on your screen. We've got some limited consultations with our platform experts. You can click on that one to learn more as well. It's been fun as always, Abby, joining you on the webinar. Thank you so much to you, and thank you so much to everyone for listening. We'll see you on the next one.
thank you all. Bye.